Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hacker News Daily podcast, where we break down the top stories that got the tech community talking. I'm your host, and today we're diving into yesterday's most fascinating discussions from Hacker News. Out of the 20 stories that made waves yesterday, we've pulled the 5 that really captured the community's attention. And let me tell you, it's quite a mix. We've got everything from someone literally turning e-waste into a web server to major players in fintech making questionable moves into crypto, to some deep soul-searching about whether our most popular tools are actually holding us back. What I love about today's selection is how it perfectly captures this moment in tech. We're simultaneously achieving incredible technical feats while also questioning whether we're using our capabilities wisely. It's this constant push and pull between look what we can do and should we actually be doing this? So buckle up because we're starting with what might be the most 2024 story I've ever covered. All right, so our first story is absolutely wild. Hosting a website on a disposable vape. And yes, you heard that right. Someone actually turned a disposable vape into a web server. And honestly, this might be the most 2024 thing I've heard all year. So here's what happened. This hacker got their hands on a disposable vape and discovered something kind of mind-blowing. These things that we're literally throwing in the trash contain ARM Cortex-M0 Plus processors. We're talking about actual programmable computers with 24 kilobytes of flash memory and 3 kilobytes of RAM. And get this, they also have USB-C ports and rechargeable batteries in a product that's designed to be thrown away after maybe a week of use. The hacker managed to reverse engineer the whole thing, found some conveniently labeled debug pins, which, thank you Chinese manufacturers for making that easy, and reprogrammed this vape's microcontroller to serve web pages. Now, working with only 3 kilobytes of RAM that's insane. That's less memory than this sentence probably takes up as a text file. But they pulled it off, got a functional web server running on hardware that was designed to be thrown away after maybe a week of use. The Hacker News community is having a field day with this one. 759 points, nearly 400 comments, and the reactions are this perfect mix of, this is technically incredible, and this is an environmental disaster. One commenter nailed it when they said they wouldn't want to be the lawyer arguing how a device with USB-C and a rechargeable battery can be classified as disposable. Because that's the thing. At what point does something stop being disposable? When it has a rechargeable battery? When it has a standardized charging port? When it contains a computer more powerful than what sent humans to the moon? What's really fascinating here is the discussion around why these vapes are so over-engineered. Turns out, and this is where it gets even weirder, some manufacturers are adding USB-C and rechargeable batteries specifically to skirt regulations about disposable vapes. By making them technically reusable, they can sell them in places where truly disposable vapes are banned. It's this bizarre regulatory cat and mouse game that's resulted in throwaway products containing legitimate computing hardware. People in the comments are also pointing out other examples of this weird phenomenon, like those super cheap 4T dongles from China that cost less than a coffee but contain surprisingly capable hardware. We've somehow reached this point where computing power is so cheap that we're literally throwing computers in the garbage regularly. One person mentioned their disposable vape has more computing power than their first computer, which is both hilarious and deeply concerning. The technical achievement here is genuinely impressive, though. Getting a web server to run in 3 kilobytes of RAM requires some serious optimization skills. This isn't just plugging in some framework and calling it a day. This is bare metal programming, counting every byte, probably hand-optimizing assembly code. It's the kind of constraint-based programming that used to be normal back in the day, but is basically a lost art now. But man, the environmental implications, we're talking about millions of these devices getting tossed every year, each one containing lithium batteries, rare earth elements, and now, apparently, perfectly functional microcontrollers. It's like if we decided smartphones were single-use items. The e-waste problem is already massive, and here we are actively making it worse with products designed to be thrown away after a few hundred puffs. There's this one comment that tries to find a silver lining, saying, hey, at least humanity has gotten so good at making computers that we can afford to throw them away. And I guess technically that's true, but it feels like celebrating that we're so rich we can burn money for warmth. Just because we can make computers this cheap doesn't mean we should be designing them to be garbage. What really gets me is that this whole situation exists because of this weird intersection of regulation, consumer behavior, and capitalism. Nobody sat down and said, you know what would be great? Putting ARM processors in disposable vapes. It just kind of happened. Through the series of incentives and workarounds and cost optimizations, we ended up in this absurd place where a disposable nicotine delivery device is technically capable of serving web pages. The hacker who did this project deserves serious props for both the technical skill and for highlighting just how bonkers this whole situation is. It's art, really, taking this symbol of disposable consumer culture and turning it into something that serves information. There's something poetic about that, in a deeply dystopian sort of way. Speaking of companies making questionable decisions with technology, our next story involves a company that's been around since the dawn of online payments, trying to stay relevant in the crypto age. All right, shifting gears here to our next story. PayPal is making a pretty bold move into cryptocurrency, announcing they'll support Ethereum and Bitcoin directly in their payment flows. And wow, did this one stir up the Hacker News crowd. 391 points and over 300 comments, most of which are, let's just say, not exactly enthusiastic. So here's what PayPal's actually doing. They're rolling out these things called PayPal links, basically one-time payment links you can share in any conversation, any messaging app. Think of it like, you know how you can share a Google Doc link? Same idea, but for sending money. They're starting in the US and expanding to the UK, Italy, and other markets. But the real kicker, the thing that's got everyone talking, is that they're integrating crypto directly into their peer-to-peer payment system. We're talking Bitcoin, Ethereum, and something called PYUSD, that's PayPal's own stablecoin, flowing through both PayPal and Venmo. Now, on paper, this sounds huge, right? PayPal's got something like 430 million active accounts worldwide. If even a fraction of those people start using crypto through their platform, that's mainstream adoption we're talking about. They're positioning this as part of their PayPal World initiative, trying to connect all these different payment systems globally. The message is clear. Send money as easily as sending a text, whether it's dollars, euros, or Bitcoin. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean contentious. The Hacker News community is having none of it. And honestly, they've got some valid points. The overwhelming sentiment in those 305 comments is basically, are you kidding me? PayPal, the company notorious for freezing accounts and holding people's money hostage, we're supposed to trust them with our crypto? One commenter put it perfectly. They said, this is like asking the fox to guard the henhouse. PayPal has this reputation, earned over decades, of being incredibly trigger-happy with account freezes. Small businesses, individual sellers, people just trying to receive payments. There are horror stories all over the internet about PayPal holding funds for months with zero explanation. And now they want to be custodians of people's cryptocurrency? The irony is almost painful. Think about what cryptocurrency was supposed to be about. Decentralization, being your own bank, not having to trust intermediaries. And here comes PayPal saying, hey, trust us with your Bitcoin. It's fundamentally contradictory to everything crypto was built to solve. Several commenters pointed out that if you're using PayPal to hold your crypto, you're not really using crypto at all. You're just using PayPal with extra steps. There was even this whole side discussion about whether the announcement was legitimate. The press release came from newsroom.paypal-corp.com, and multiple users were like, wait, is this a phishing site? That's how much distrust there is. People literally couldn't believe PayPal would use that domain for official announcements. Turns out it is legitimate, but the fact that so many technically savvy people questioned it, that tells you something about PayPal's communication strategy.
Now, there was one interesting counterpoint in the discussion. A user named Selling Cochalar suggested that this isn't really about PayPal suddenly discovering crypto in 2024. They've actually been dabbling in this space for a while. The theory is that PayPal's been waiting for regulatory clarity, especially in the US, where the SEC has been, let's say, unpredictable about crypto regulation. So maybe this announcement is less, we're innovating, and more, okay, the lawyers finally said we can do this without getting sued.
And you know what? Despite all the negativity, several people admitted they still use PayPal because, and I quote, it's a necessary evil. For all its faults, PayPal does offer buyer protection that you just don't get with pure crypto transactions or even bank transfers. If you're buying something from a stranger online, that dispute resolution process, as painful as it might be, is still better than nothing. The timing here is fascinating too. They're targeting 2025 for the full crypto rollout, which suggests they're betting big on this being the year crypto finally goes mainstream with regular consumers. But given the community reaction, you have to wonder, are they solving a problem that actually exists? Do PayPal users really want to send Bitcoins through the app? Or is this more about PayPal trying to stay relevant as traditional finance and crypto continue to converge? What really strikes me about this whole thing is the trust paradox at play here. PayPal needs crypto to appeal to younger, tech-savvy users and stay competitive. But those exact users are the ones who understand why trusting PayPal with crypto is problematic at best. It's like they're caught between their legacy business model and the future they're trying to build, and those two things are fundamentally incompatible. The international remittance angle is probably where this could actually make sense, though. Those PayPal links, if they work across borders with minimal fees, that could genuinely disrupt how people send money internationally. But again, it all comes back to trust. And based on these comments, PayPal's got a long way to go before the crypto community will trust them with their digital assets. You know what? Speaking of companies making questionable decisions that frustrate their users, let's talk about another tech giant that's been letting quality slip through the cracks, the Mac app flea market. All right, now we're diving into something that really caught fire on Hacker News, the Mac app flea market. And wow, this one struck a nerve with the community. You know how when you walk through an actual flea market and you see those tables full of Nokia phones and Adidas sneakers? Well, turns out the Mac App Store has become the digital equivalent, except instead of knockoff designer bags, it's absolutely drowning in fake ChatGPT apps. So here's what's wild. The author went searching for ChatGPT in the Mac App Store, and what they found was this sea of apps, all with nearly identical black and white icons, all claiming to be ChatGPT or some variation of it. But here's the kicker, and I mean, this is the part that made my jaw drop. The actual official ChatGPT app from OpenAI, it's not even in the Mac App Store. You can only get it from OpenAI's website directly. So literally every single result you're seeing when you search for ChatGPT in Apple's supposedly curated store, they're all knockoffs. Every single one. The naming conventions on these apps are something else too. It's like watching SEO keyword stuffing in real time. You've got AI, chat, assistant, bot, helper, plus pro, and every possible permutation of those words. The developers are basically throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something will stick when someone searches for AI chat tools. And apparently, it's working because these apps are getting downloads from confused users who think they're getting the real thing. What really gets me about this whole situation, Apple takes a 30% cut of everything sold through their store, right? They've built this whole narrative around the App Store being this safe, curated space where users are protected from malware and scams. That's literally their justification for the walled garden approach. But then you look at what's actually happening, and it's like, what curation? What quality control? You've got dozens of apps masquerading as one of the most popular AI tools on the planet, and Apple's review team is apparently just waving them through. The Hacker News discussion on this was absolutely brutal toward Apple, and honestly, I can't blame them. One commenter perfectly summed it up by calling app stores software ghettos. Harsh, but when you think about it,
They promised us this beautiful, safe neighborhood and delivered something that looks more like a digital Times Square full of knockoff merchandise. There's this fascinating pattern emerging too, where none of the major AI companies, not OpenAI, not Anthropic with Claude, not really any of the big players, are putting their apps in the Mac App Store. And you have to wonder, why? Is it the 30% cut? Is it the restrictions Apple places on apps? Or have these companies looked at what the App Store has become and decided they don't want their legitimate products sitting next to ChatGPT Ultimate Pro Max AI Assistant Bot 2024?
One commenter brought up an interesting contradiction, though. Users complain when Apple is too strict with their approval process, rejecting apps for minor infractions or interpreting guidelines too harshly. But then we also complain when they're too loose and let all this garbage through. It's like Apple can't win either way. Though I'd argue there's a pretty clear middle ground between rejecting apps for using the wrong shade of blue and allowing 50 ChatGPT clones with identical icons. The broader implications here are kind of concerning. We're seeing this race to the bottom where the democratization of app development, which AI is only going to accelerate, means anyone can pump out an app in a weekend. One commenter compared it to what happened with self-publishing on Amazon. Suddenly, everyone could be an author, which sounds great in theory, but in practice means finding actual good books becomes like finding a needle in a haystack of poorly edited vampire romance novels. There was one bright spot in the discussion. Several people mentioned SetApp, which is this subscription service that actually curates apps properly. It's proof that the curation model can work. Apple just isn't doing it. They're collecting their commission and apparently calling it a day. What really strikes me about this whole mess is that it's happening in one of the hottest tech categories right now. AI chatbots are having their moment. Everyone wants to try ChatGPT, and Apple's response is to let their store become a minefield of knockoffs. It's not just bad for users who might get scammed, it's actively damaging to Apple's reputation as this premium, quality-focused company. When your app store looks like a sketchy flea market, that premium sheen starts to wear off pretty quickly. Speaking of tech companies not being transparent with their users, our next story takes us into the world of IoT devices, where one person's attempt to watch their dog uncovered some pretty concerning security practices. All right, so our next story is absolutely fascinating. Wanted to spy on my dog, ended up spying on TP-Link. This one really resonated with the Hacker News crowd, pulling in 345 points and 120 comments, and honestly, I can see why. You know how sometimes you buy a simple gadget for a simple purpose, and it turns into this whole technical odyssey? That's exactly what happened here. This developer just wanted to check on their dog while they were away. Totally normal pet parent behavior, right? They grabbed a cheap TP-Link Tapo camera, probably thinking it'd be a quick setup, and instead, they ended up reverse engineering the entire thing and uncovering some pretty concerning security practices. So here's what kicked it all off. The camera kept failing authentication randomly. The developer would change their cloud password like we're all supposed to do for security, and suddenly the camera would just stop working. No error message explaining why, no documentation about this quirk, nothing. Turns out, and this is wild, TP-Link cameras don't update their stored credentials when you change your password after the initial setup. The device just keeps trying to authenticate with your old password forever. That's just broken design, honestly. But instead of returning the camera or writing an angry review like most of us would, this person went full detective mode. They started decompiling the Android app, intercepting TLS traffic. They even had to bypass certificate pinning using something called Frida to hook into the certificate verification process. For those not familiar, certificate pinning is supposed to be a security feature that prevents man-in-the-middle attacks. But when you're trying to figure out why your own device won't work with your own account, well, you've got to break a few eggs. What they discovered gets even more interesting. TP-Link deliberately restricts features to push their subscription service.
Want two-way audio to talk to your dog through the camera? Can't use the standard RTSP protocol that works with everything else? Nope, you have to use their proprietary TAPO protocol. It's like buying a car and finding out you can only use the radio if you subscribe to the manufacturer's music service. The Hacker News community had a field day with this one. People were sharing all sorts of workarounds they've discovered, integrating these cameras with Frigate NVR, using GoToRTC for RTSP streaming. It's like this whole underground railroad of users helping each other escape TP-Link's walled garden. One commenter even pointed out that the hard-coded admin password the author found was actually from a CVE back in 2022, which kind of shows how common these security issues are becoming in IoT devices. What really struck me about the discussion, though, was this sense of resignation mixed with determination. One user said finding hard-coded admin passwords in consumer devices is so common now, it's no big deal anymore. That's just terrifying when you think about it. We've got millions of these black box devices in people's homes running outdated firmware with security holes that manufacturers either don't know about or don't care to fix. But here's the thing that gets me. This whole situation could have been avoided if TP-Link just documented their products properly and didn't try to force people into subscriptions for basic features. The author didn't set out to expose security flaws or reverse engineer anything. They literally just wanted to watch their dog. And the community response shows there are tons of people in the same boat, frustrated enough to spend hours finding workarounds rather than just paying for the subscription. It really highlights this bigger tension in the IoT space right now. Companies want that recurring revenue, so they're locking down devices and pushing cloud services, but users are pushing back hard, especially the technical ones. And when you make your product hostile enough to your users, well, they're going to find ways around it, and they're going to share what they find. TP-Link probably thought they were being clever with their restrictions, but instead they've created this whole community of people actively working to circumvent their systems and in the process exposing security vulnerabilities that affect all their users. The irony here is beautiful in a way. A company tries to spy on its users' behavior to monetize them better and ends up getting spied on themselves by a frustrated dog owner. There's probably a lesson in there somewhere about transparency and treating your customers with respect. But I doubt TP-Link's listening. And speaking of the tech industry's tendency to lock us into solutions that might not be in our best interest, our final story today tackles one of the biggest sacred cows in web development. All right, moving on to our final story, and this one really struck a nerve in the community. React is winning by default and slowing innovation. This piece has sparked quite the debate with over 330 points and 350 comments on Hacker News. And honestly, I can see why people are fired up. So here's the provocative claim at the heart of this. React isn't dominating front-end development because it's technically superior anymore. It's winning simply because, well, it already won. The author argues we're stuck in this self-perpetuating cycle where teams choose React not after careful evaluation, but because everyone knows React. It's become the nobody gets fired for choosing IBM of the JavaScript world. And you know what? There's something to this argument. Think about the last time you started a new project. Did you actually sit down and evaluate whether React was the best tool for your specific constraints? Or did you just reach for Create React App because that's what you do? The article points out that this reflexive choice is preventing genuinely innovative frameworks from getting a fair shot. Now, let me tell you about some of these alternatives that are supposedly being overlooked. Take Svelte. Instead of shipping a runtime and doing all this virtual DOM diffing in the browser, it compiles your components down to vanilla JavaScript that directly manipulates the DOM. No overhead, just the code you need. Then there's Solid, which uses fine-grained reactivity. Basically, it knows exactly what needs to update when state changes. No virtual DOM comparison needed. And Quick, this one's really interesting. It's designed for instant startup by serializing the application state on the server and resuming it on the client, rather than re-executing everything. The article references Rich Harris's famous piece, Virtual DOM is Pure Overhead. And look, the virtual DOM was brilliant for 2013. It solved real problems. But the argument here is that modern compilers can do better. They can generate optimized update code at build time instead of figuring it out at runtime. Here's where it gets spicy, though. The Hacker News discussion is completely split on this. You've got one camp saying, finally, someone said it. React is coasting on network effects. And then you've got others defending React pretty vigorously. One commenter, Hook No Side, argues that React isn't winning by default at all. It's winning because it's so effective, so well designed, that it earned its place as the standard. And honestly, both sides have a point. On one hand, React's ecosystem is massive. The hiring pool is huge. The tooling is mature. Companies can find React developers easily, and developers can find React jobs easily. That's not nothing. Some folks in the discussion are actually relieved that we've moved past the JavaScript Framework of the Week chaos from 2015. Remember that exhaustion? Every week there was a new framework you had to learn. But here's the counterargument that really resonated with me. Are we trading JavaScript fatigue for React fatigue? Because now, instead of learning new frameworks, we're bolting on increasingly complex state management solutions, build tools, and meta frameworks just to make React performant and developer-friendly. Next.js, Remix, endless discussions about whether to use Redux or Zustand or Jotai. One particularly interesting take from the discussion came from Mhitsa, who suggested maybe the JavaScript ecosystem should just stop innovating for a few years. Let browsers catch up and develop better native components. There's this ongoing conversation about web components being the potential escape hatch from framework lock-in, allowing different teams to use different tools while still sharing components. The thing is, this isn't just about React versus everything else. It's about how technologies win in our industry. Is it technical merit, developer experience, or is it just whoever gets critical mass first? The article's arguing that React has reached that tipping point where its popularity is its main feature. Teams choose it because other developers know it, which means more developers learn it, which means more teams choose it. You see the cycle. And this matters because if true innovation is happening in frameworks like Solid or Svelte, but nobody's looking at them because we use React, then are we leaving performance and developer experience gains on the table? Are we settling for good enough when great is available? The discussion also touched on something I think is crucial. Different projects have different needs. A marketing site, an internal dashboard, a real-time collaboration tool. They all have different constraints. But if React is the hammer and everything looks like a nail, we might be over-engineering simple problems and under-engineering complex ones. You know what really stood out to me in this whole debate? Nobody's really arguing that React is bad. It's clearly good enough for Facebook, Netflix, and countless other companies. The question is whether good enough plus network effects is preventing us from finding better, and whether that even matters if the ecosystem and hiring advantages outweigh any technical improvements.
These aren't just technical discussions. They're reflections of where we are as an industry. We've got incredible capabilities, but we're still figuring out how to use them responsibly. And that tension, that constant push and pull between innovation and responsibility, between what we can do and what we should do, that's what makes following tech news so fascinating. Thanks for joining me today as we explored these stories from the Hacker News community. If you enjoyed this deep dive into yesterday's top discussions, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. Until then, keep questioning, keep building, and keep pushing for technology that actually makes things better, not just different. This has been your Hacker News Daily Podcast. I'll catch you tomorrow with another round of the stories that matter in tech. Stay curious.